Morning, everybody. How we doing today? Today is Wednesday. I hope everyone's doing well. That's once again that sick Argo sound. Argo, by the mid '60s, has this real rhythm and blues modernity to its production that's top of the mark. This is a Illinois Jack Cat record called Spectrum. It's something that's kind of easy to pass over. You see it quite frequently, but it's actually really good. And it's incredibly well produced. You know, there's a polish to it that, compared to the 50s Argo, which can be pretty raw, Chicago gutter, you know, blues house sounding. And it's always been well produced, don't get me wrong. Chess Records doesn't really mess around. But there's a sleekness to this by the mid '60s. You listen to like Sonny Stitt, Benny Green, my main man. The song here, I think it's Fire and Ice is called, or Flame and Frost. Sorry, outstanding, modern. I play this a lot DJing. It's just got such a cool feel to it. It sounds like it could have been recorded recently. And there's a song here too, Now and Then, that I feel is the same way about. I dropped a little bit in my episode the other day. And so if you like that R&B kind of bluesy sound, you know, that's got some polish to it, and it's got a little bit more, like I said, just a pop rhythm and blues sensibility that's fairly sophisticated and rooted in R&B that I really enjoy. And again, the production translates really well into a DJ set, because when you have good highs and mids and lows, it's easy to mix that with modern stuff that's got that full spectrum as well. When something's really smashed or crushed or doesn't have some of the early hip-hop vinyl, you know, by early I mean 90s stuff, some of that Wu-Tang stuff, just has a real smashed, even that first Nas record on vinyl has a real thin sound. And of course Dr. Dre was the one that kind of comes along and puts that juice back in that shit and makes it really thick. I'm a big Dr. Dre guy. His production was always pretty insane. But I'm going to talk to you about the cards, but first I want to talk about something else that was brought up to me yesterday in a comment about record grading. And in some ways, record grading has never been more difficult. In a past decade, you know, up until the last 10 years or so, a lot of stuff that's being sold wouldn't have even been considered sellable. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's being sold in the marketplace now because of demand, because of a lack of supply. There's just stuff that's getting out there that's no one would have dreamed of selling 10 years ago. And now they're asking sometimes decent money for beat up copies of things. And the first and biggest problem with grading nowadays, here in 2021, is that a lot of what we shop online. And I don't know about you, maybe I'm just going blind, which of course I got some close-up look inspecting glasses here, but for reading fine print. But there's no way you can really grade a record online. Even with the photographs and even with decent lighting on the photographs, you have to pretty much go by the seller's feedback and reputation, which I find to be fairly consistent. You know, the biggest concerns is when some guy's a new seller and you don't know his reputation. Usually a few questions you can find out pretty quick. Does this guy know records? Is he a guy that's from a physical record store and has a large inventory and knows vinyl? Or is he more some novice that his uncle gave him some records and he's selling them, and he's admitting, he goes, I don't know what I'm doing. I've had people admit that, you know, that I don't know what this stuff is. And so there's a real range. So grading online, it's all about trusting your seller and knowing their reputation. And that's not to say that I haven't got a wide range of very good minus. I've got a wide range of very good plus. There's been a wide range in good. One guy's good is really a fair or a poor. Some guy's good is a very good plus. I've gotten some stuff that was graded good that everything was such a superficial paper scuff, split seams, things that don't affect the play at all. And if it's a rare record that goes for hundreds of dollars, and someone's selling one for 15 because it's got paper scuffs there, and they don't recognize that that's all that is, and they want to sell it for $15, you jump at that. And the rareness always comes into play in terms of how much you're willing to spend and how much of a chance you're willing to take on something that's graded less than. You can't be there to inspect it yourself. That's the problem. So you're just trusting what somebody else has to say. So the next facet of grading is in the wild when you're actually in a store. And I washed my hair yesterday, so the ceiling fans are blowing up all the little fine hairs into my eyes. It's kind of annoying. But grading in record stores, that's a whole different ball game. And even there, the store manager reputation can play a large stake in that. Cheapo in Minneapolis, Tony has been doing this forever. And if he grades something very good or a fine or whatever their system is, I can pretty much guarantee it's going to be that. I know how he grades. I know the consistency of how he grades. I know how he looks under the light. And that being said, good lighting is important. But I want to first start by saying a blind person can grade vinyl. And I'm saying that because it's not what you see, it's what you feel that's important. And there's also a big difference between a tick and a skip. And my ears, after 30 years of plus of vinyl, can hear a record the first time I play it, hear a tick, go, oh, I can get that out of there. I almost always know that's a little speck of something. And that stuff's usually just to pop out of the groove. Of course, I use my record cleaner from Ken now on a lot of my new arrivals, especially used stuff. I don't use it as often as I should. Sometimes I'm just lazy or just preoccupied with other things that I want to, it's like I put this on and go back to what I'm doing. But that cleaner will take a lot of that particulates and dust and oil off and give you a nice clean surface to play. But a tick isn't something to worry about too much about. Usually just a little particulate or a little speck of something, and that stuff will pop right out. And I'm rarely wrong about that. A skip is a different sound, and that's a physical either defect in the groove, which you do find that on some 90s and later vinyl for some reason, probably on earlier stuff too, but it seems like whenever I find a record that looks mint but has a skip in it somewhere, usually I feel like it's a pressing issue. And I've had that happen more than once, numerous times. Not frequently by any means, but it's happened. But skips are, and how feelable something is your main measuring stick in the flesh. You can close your eyes and just run your hands around that surface. And if you're feeling little bumps, little ridges, little grooves, that's a troubled thing. There's a lot of scuffs and marks you'll see in a record that you won't feel. And for those people who grade records who don't really know, or some of the new people to rag vinyl, they'll get a record and they go, oh, there's marks all. If you can't feel it, you're not going to hear it, generally speaking. Give it a cleaning, and especially pre-1970 vinyl. The vinyl's a pretty thick, heavy gauge, and the grooves are fairly deep in that vinyl, so surface stuff just doesn't come out. You don't hear it. A deeper groove, one that you can feel across tracks, that's when you really have to be careful. And again, there's a relativity there. How much do I want something? How rare is something? How many more copies do I think are available to me that I can find? You can gauge all that stuff. And if I find a record I really want that's got a feelable skip in it, but it looks like most of the tracks are fine, but the price makes it very doable, I'll sometimes take that $15 pressing over the $80 pressing. I'm like, it's one song out of 9, and sometimes, well, even when a seller says this record will skip on this track, I found that it hasn't with a good cleaning. So there's a lot of good bargains to be had. Grading is a really tricky thing nowadays, but it's not difficult, if you know what I'm saying. There's a lot of variables to how we buy records today that impact grading, But grading in and of itself is not a hard thing. If you're in the wild, you find something, doesn't matter what the grading is, if you can feel or not feel, that's going to determine largely how well it plays. And then how rare that record is will impact how much they're going to ask for. There's plenty of records that in good condition will fetch far more than a lot of records that are near mint condition, because the near mint ones, there's thousands of copies of it and no one wants it, you know. So vinyl is a very fleeting thing in that sense. And there's also a level of how much noise and imperfection are you willing to take. Myself, I don't get too worked up about a little noise on a record. I don't mind a little background cackle, a little fire in the background. I don't depend, especially if it's an older something. You know, if it's pre-1960, especially a little, you know, crackle of a fireplace. It puts it on the radio. You know, in the warm Walton's kind of a sense for me, and I don't really have a problem with that. I don't want a bunch of skipping and jumping. And for me, jumping is the worst. Worse than a skip is a jump, and that's when you're playing that record and it hits a groove, a mark or a ding, and it just jumps further down the record. That can be very jaunty when you're listening, and I don't really enjoy when a record, when you're playing it and there's like 5 jumps in the first track. It's like, oh, that's so much more noticeable. Sometimes a lot of skips will create a loop that almost can be in time. This is that groove I played the other day. Sick. Great record. This is different than Illinois Jacketta of his younger days. You know, when he was the Texas Tenorman, blowing some hardcore stuff. And by hardcore, I mean hard swinging, hard driving, very bluesy, very much in the roots of the Texas Tenorman, R&B, jazz, blues fusion that's happening in those great barbecue joints of the Deep South. But so grading records, again, it's the most important thing is how it feels. And if it's an old record, even some of those things that you feel, you won't hear more than a very small click. A very small click. And that's kind of where your measure comes in. How much click and how much static and how much imperfection are you okay with versus how much do you want to spend. And if money's no object, and you know, I mean, you don't care if you spend $500 on a record. And that's the other thing too, is you don't want to spend $500 a record and have it be imperfect. That's the other measure. Is there's a lot of people out there selling records in a condition that's very questionable for the prices that they're asking. And some of them are just outright outlandish. I made an episode about that a few months back. It's just some of these guys online are just outright liars. This record should never be that much. And someone suggests, well, maybe they're just laundering money through that eBay. And I'm like, okay, it'd be one way to launder some drug money. Put a bunch of $2 records up and make it look like they're selling for $6,000. Like, that's coming to show. I was seeing some pretty outlandish stuff. But so it's grading records. Again, it's not as difficult as some people make it seem, and it's not a science by any means. It's about getting to know each seller individually and what their standards are. And like, when you go to a Carolina Soul or a Funk You Sounds, you can count on those guys giving you a fair grade almost every time. Very reputable, and they've sold tens of thousands of records, you know. So if you do your research and your homework and you message the seller, and if something does have a listed imperfection that's significant, there's almost always willingness on the seller's part to come to a deal. I want 40 for this, but it's got this. You know, and you're like, oh, it's got writing on the back jacket and track 7 skips. How about I give you 30 for that? They're going to be more willing to be like, yeah, I'm okay with that. Let's work with that. This is that Hank Mobley record I played for you in the last episode. Hank Mobley, it's not even a Mobley record necessarily, it's the jazz message of a bunch of those cats from the East Coast. And I find it really difficult to see vinyl condition through video and photograph. You can see there's a couple visual marks there, and that one you can barely feel. That one, no, that's just a hair. There's a couple marks that are That's also hair. Hair. This record was graded as, I think, a good plus or maybe a very good minus. And it does have some surface noise. It does have, a few imperfection moments. But for the most part, it plays pretty good for something older than me. It's a nice way to find a good bargain. And I think I probably negotiated that record for $70, I think, or $60. And they go for $200, $300, $400 all the time. Even the Japanese reissues of that can go for pretty good money. And so I jumped at the chance to get an original for a decent price with a few imperfections. But again, I feel like myself, I'm a musical archaeologist. And pottery shards to me have a great deal of value. I don't need the vase to be immaculate. I'm not putting this record on my shelf as a showpiece to show people how cool I am. There's people who buy the collector pieces just to show them off. I swear half the people who buy old Blue Notes don't listen to them. I think some are buying them just as investments and put them on the wall and like everyone go, how cool is this guy? I've never really been after the collectible pieces in that sense. You end up finding them, you end up stumbling onto them, and the more obscure a record is, the better chance you are of finding one that's in great condition and a collectible condition. But the demand isn't the same, or the demand is slowly changing. Some artists lose favor over time, some start to gain favor. Different films and soundtracks, and there's lots of things that can make an artist have a second life in a collectible sense. Having a great song and a great soundtrack can make an artist very collectible again all of a sudden, which it's hard to predict that stuff. So, and someone passing away, that can also drive up the cost of someone's records temporarily. But again, I'm more of an archaeologist when it comes down to it. I just want the artifacts to put together the history of what these people were eating along this riverbank, and what kind of seeds, what kind of pollen, what kind of irrigation were they using. You can glean a lot from pottery and pottery shards. You don't need the whole vase to learn. And so from my perspective as the jazz shepherd, as DJ Dan, as the collector, there's a lot of stuff that's worth collecting that's not perfect, but the price is better, it makes it more affordable, and you can learn more by listening and jumping into the music and feeling what it's telling you than the guy with the mint vase on his shelf that never listens to it and doesn't know nothing besides what he's been told and what he's read. If you're listening to it as a piece of opulence, you're never going to hear the message in that music. You're never going to hear what those people were saying when they carved that mask. It's when you aren't just putting the showpiece on the shelf to be sophisticated and be seen a certain way. When you want that African mask to kind of have a deeper insight into the culture that carved it. And you've been down the Senegal River, and you've been through Dakar, and you've been to Monrovia and up into the mountains of Guinea, the highlands, and you've been through those places and you've connected with those people. That mask doesn't need to be perfect. It's a token and a remembrance of a group and a people and their heritage and their legacy, and it has power if you understand it. Versus the guy who bought the perfect mask for $10,000 that was carved in Cameroon, but he doesn't give a shit about Africa. It's just something that, I think my guests will admire me for my worldly demeanor. So, and there's people who buy expensive records who listen to them, of course, but I do find there is kind of you're one or the other, and I'm definitely not the perfect record having guy. That's not, I just want to know. I just want to know the music. I want to know the history, the labels. And sometimes there's records on a label that, I want to hear what that guy did, but I don't know if I'm even going to like them. So buying one that's very good for $12, that's a great way to get to know it. And if I really like it and it's blemished, maybe I'll upgrade it at some point. But I find myself, the most upgrading I do is I have an OJC or something that I've had for years and I love the record, and I stumble on an original for a good price that's maybe a good plus or a very good minus, and I'm like, I can get that for original for $35 right now. Maybe if I bundle it with a few things, I can get it even cheaper than that. And then I'll get that original pressing to put next to the OJC. And I'll probably still listen to the OJC, but oftentimes those originals still sound amazing. I've bought good original pressings that look awful and sound great. Like, it can be very deceptive just looking. Hearing and feeling is where the real magic is in terms of grading a record. And probably listening to a record in store is often the best way to go. But even sometimes those in-store listening systems are pretty inferior. You're skipping through a record with, kind of trying to needle drop it. And you kind of have to almost find the blemish and try to play that. It's not the easiest thing for sure. But having the music is what the most important thing is. That's, to me, the most important thing. So anyway, that's enough on record grading. It's not something that I think of on a daily basis or find as one of the most important aspects of collecting, but it is very important, and especially when it comes to resell, which is never part of what I think about. I never really think about, when I resell this someday, and maybe I should more, but I think the knowledge I've gleaned is more important, and that's the education, that's the degree, So anyway, I think I want to talk to you again about the trading cards again. I have 174 fronts made up, and we're not halfway. I think to cover the body of musicians through the late 20s up into 1970 in jazz, we're going to easily have 400 people, and I think them maybe even more. And so I'm still trying to figure out how to. I think the backs, we got to do some kind of little bio with some important records on the discography listed, something like that. Again, it's kind of coming down to how do we release them to people, and how many at a time, and how frequently should we release them. What's the good interval for everybody? And we're going to get different answers from people because I can't please everybody. But again, I don't want to do too many at once where it's like too much, and people are like, I'm overwhelmed. But I don't want to do too few too infrequently where half the people don't lose interest by the second and third round. I want to keep people kind of engaged with it. And I've learned a lot making these cards. I'm always learning doing these episodes. I'm always learning. You're always kind of learning and relearning and remembering, like, oh yeah, I forgot this was on this and you worked with this. There's always so much of that going on. And these are super educational pieces. I can speak with confidence. If you have this set of cards, it will double your knowledge in jazz. Just seeing on these cards all the places people come from. Detroit, ain't no one gonna hold you down, boy. You coming hard with the jazz musicians. You deliver the goods. Chicago, New York, Pittsburgh, some of these places just produce so many of the greats. Cleveland, Cincinnati, some of those places, Dayton. Ohio has a nice collection between its four big cities of Dayton, Cleveland, Ohio, Cincinnati. There's a nice little collection of musicians there. Philadelphia is a great city. Boston's surprisingly weak with a few greats. But Newark, which is kind of New York area, New Jersey. Camden's very much the Philadelphia area, New Jersey. So I'm always trying to regionalize, to put people in groups together. Kansas City, St. Louis. There's a surprisingly good number of guys from Texas. And then the White Cats kind of come from almost everywhere, which is one of the real differences between the whites and the blacks and these cards. You really see that. Just seeing the chronology of when they show up in the scene, and the glut of people that all show up in 45 after the war. People coming home from the war, people who weren't really allowed to record or be professional musicians during the war. A lot of things seem to change in the late 40s, where everyone kind of just shows up on the scene, that whole next wave of the bebop and the post-swing guys. It's pretty crazy. Just seeing, I have 30 tenor saxophones made right now. Just seeing all those tenor sax players and sorting them by different instruments. I think that's going to be pretty fascinating and interesting. So there's lots of ways you can look at these cards. I'm also listing the genres that each player were primarily associated with. Whether you're swing, whether you're bebop, whether you're post-bop. I've also created a word called cool bop, which for me is a definition of a hard-driving West Coast descendant of bebop that's not hard bop. I think West Coast cool is a disservice to a lot of what happened on the West Coast. And there is West Coast cool. Kyle Jader's West Coast cool. Dave Brubeck is West Coast cool. You know, a lot of these guys dabble in West Coast cool, but there's a lot of West Coast cool bop. That's up tempo, aggressive, hard driving. That doesn't sound so different from hard bop. It's just short, it's coming in an emotional context. And there's black cats that make cool bop. Dexter Gordon kind of makes cool bop, especially on the West Coast records. You know, so it's just a term I've kind of coined. And a lot of those terms are kind of interchangeable, post-bop, modern. For me, modern describes everything kind of after bebop and hard bop. And you can be a modern player and come from those schools, but when you make stuff that's kind of in small groups, post bebop, post hard bop, I often just call that post bop or modern, depending on the context. So it's fun kind of putting these definitions on the different cards of each player, and just to see who's really in what camp, and how many of the swing cats end up in the small group context of the late 40s, early 50s, and how great a lot of that music is. Some of my favorite jazz at this point is small group material by swing era cats. Guys that are great players, have always worked in ensembles, had a lot of chords and playing in unison and establishing melodies, but they also got chances to solo in those big groups, but now they're in smaller groups. So they're still stating melodies as a group, but they're so wonderful at playing with that newfound freedom of the small group setting. You're going to get a lot more bars to stretch out in. These guys seem excited at times just to be Ben Webster and Harry Edisoning. You know, I mean, just going into it, speaking some stuff. I love the depth of these old wise men. You know, and I love the aggression of the young Blue Note kids. You know, that fire and that rebellious determination of the young generation. But there's a wisdom and an emotional stability to the wisdom of the older cats. And their small group settings that you find on Prestige, on Blue Note, and Riverside, and then especially on Verve in the late 50s. Like, listen to some of that Sonny Stitt stuff, late 50s on Verve. It's outstanding. Outstanding stuff. So, again, the cards, it's been really educational. And so I think people need to have these cards. And again, the set is just going to be a big set. And so I think it does make sense to make it available to people as a virtual file. You know, you can play it on your screen, loop in a slideshow. I'm going to make a little video of a slideshow of what I've got done at some point here too, and post that on YouTube because I think this is really cool. But the physical enacting of these cards, how we get them into physical cards, that's something that's still puzzling me. Myself, I got a decent printer, and I know I could probably do it, but it's going to cost me some ink and some paper, which I'm okay with, you know, especially once I get back to working. But I'd love to find a way to have someone just print them, and I don't want to come into legal issues. You know, I don't want to come into copyright issues. And so, like I said, I think the best way is to have them promotional, educational, and that's what their purpose is, and as a way to thank people who either make donations to the channel or are long-term Patreon subscribers. These are free for those people, and we'll see where it goes from there. But I'm excited about this set. Like I said, I'm 174 fronts done, and it's been fun to do it. You know, I'm not working right now, so I put in 5-6 hours a day. So if you do a couple hours, take a break, do a couple more hours, and just learning, just putting it down. And I gotta say, I want to have a physical set of these cards. I really do. And so I think if I keep talking about it in these episodes, we'll get to a place where someone has a great idea that really puts the nail in the coffin. I'm getting a lot of great feedback from people on it, both on Patreon and on YouTube, and even a few on Facebook. I appreciate all that insight, and it's all being factored in. And again, I don't have the money right now to go out and, you know, print them all myself and send them, and I can't really sell them. I don't think that's not going to be an option. And so we're still trying to navigate that aspect of it. But even as a file where you have a 4-minute video with these 400 plus cards. It would be a fantastic little piece. But I think they'll be a real great shopping tool. If you're in a record store and you have this box of trading cards with you, and you stumble across so-and-so, like, oh, I think I have his card, and you look in the bass player section, and there it is, Harry Babison. Oh, cool. This is that Nocturne record he talked about. I think it'll help people find records when they're in the store that they might have passed over, or sometimes you can just Google on your phone, of course, but I think these cards will be a fun way to broaden everybody's musical canon, everybody's recognition of who was the major important people in jazz in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And these are the eras of jazz that are really being overlooked now, especially 30s and 40s. The 50s still gets quite a bit of recognition, especially post-55, the LP era, the early 50s 10-inch era. There's certainly less knowledge of, and those artists get more overlooked. But even the mid-50s, late 50s, and the early 60s, there's a ton of great artists on the periphery, like a Selden Powell, that just doesn't get the notoriety today. A Jimmy Forrest that deserves people to know about him, and you shouldn't be passing these records up. So, cards, still a work in progress, but we're getting there. Grading, do what you do, figure out what your parameters are, and that's the best way to really go. And then my next episode is going to be on Prestige Swingville. We did Moodsville 3 weeks ago or so. People really seem to enjoy that. I got a few Swingville records in the mail that I didn't have, that I wanted to finish out the series. I have them all now. So Swingsville will be my next episode. I'm looking forward to making that. Just got this one right here in the mail. I was going to go through some of these records here and grade them, some of my recent arrivals, but we've already kind of run through enough time here. I did find the first ABC record, which is kind of cool. ABC 100. Alec Templeton, a fine piano player, who also has a really early record at Atlantic. I like Alec Templeton quite a lot. So anyway, that's today's episode, grading records, and hope you all enjoy that. Find something valuable in that for you. Let me know how you grade records, what is important to you. It's always interesting to hear what people have to say on those levels. And we'll talk to you all soon. Support the channel at Patreon if you enjoy the content and want to help out, or go to the merch store. There's some great stuff here. Support the podcast. Just keep trying to grow that Jazz Shepherd, universe. And it's a small universe. Yeah, I mean, it ain't gonna make much of a big bang at this point. There's not a lot of content in the Jazz Shepherd universe in terms of size in the internet world. And we got 3,400 subscribers or so, but it's growing, pretty steady incline. The numbers are all trajecting the right way. And what we lack in frill and pomp, we make up for with circumstance and content. We try to talk the real thing. Fluffy followers, people who just want something to go viral, something stupid to happen. It's not going to happen on this channel. We're going to keep it pretty grounded, down to earth. But I think it keeps us having a real strong rooted base of people that are part of this community. And I've always kind of felt that way about most of y'all. We're a community, and I'm as much part of the flock in a lot of ways as y'all are. The records are the teacher, and the collection's kind of the shepherd in a way. And I do shepherd it, but I learn as much doing this as I do teach. That's the real honest truth of it. And I do have a pretty good mind for dates and numbers and cross-reference, which gives me a nice way to analyze and cross-reference things to give things kind of a deeper meaning at times, especially overlaying geography and history and some of that. It does give things a deeper level, but again, the teacher has always been the music and the collection itself. When you have all these records, you just learn things, and you see developments, and you see changes happening in the music, and you don't have to pontificate and imagine things. When you just have 300 Riversides in a row, you can see those changes happening. It's a physical, tangible thing. Like, that's, the graphics change there, the spines change there, the sound of the production starts to change here. the amount of modern post-bop music they make really changes here. Before that, it's very swing, and after here, it becomes much more like all these things aren't just guesses and stabs in the dark. It's very much graphed and charted out by the numbers and the records and the chronologies and sequences that are all kind of exposed to my brain for years now. I've seen all this stuff unfold, and you can really see the changes in Bethlehem and Blue Note and Riverside and Prestige and Verve and Impulse, and how it all cross-references and affects and interjects and infects each other. It's all very interwoven. So I'm saying that about, it's not about my intellect. I'm trying to be, there's a great deal of humility when I say this. I'm not an expert, but I just read what the records are telling me. And I have more chapters of the book than some people, so I'm sharing what some of those chapters are saying. And so that's the best way I can describe it. It's been a thrill. I just enjoy it. I really do. I enjoy sharing. I enjoy the commenting. There's days when I don't comment back as much as I can. Just things get in the way, family, kids, life, whatever. There's also been a number of great comments lately that again disappear when I try to open them. I'll see it in my alert. I can read the first few lines of it. I click on it, try to open it, and it's not there. I'll go to the video that comment's supposed to be on. It's not there. And this has been happening the whole time I've had a channel, and I don't really know why or what is making that the case. I've asked some people at YouTube even, and we've talked to a few of my regular commenters, and we've tried to kind of artificially create it somehow. And some people said, "Oh, it's they must be deleting the comments." But most of these comments that this is happening to, from what I can tell, there's nothing in the comment that would make it worthy of being deleted. Nothing confrontational, nothing sensitive, content-wise. So I don't think that's it. But what it is, I don't know. So if ever you leave a comment that you were sure I was going to respond to, if I didn't, and you were sure I was gonna, chances are I couldn't. Some of the comments that are just kind of innocuous and don't need a response, I don't respond to, maybe just a thumb up or whatever. But if there's a comment with a question and some kind of insight, and you're probing me and wanting a response, and I don't respond, there's a good chance I couldn't open that comment up, and I don't know why. Don't know what that is about. So anyway, y'all be safe. Have a great day. Swingsville's coming. It's a great series of records, and I'm excited to show the whole thing to you, and we'll dig into that probably Friday or Saturday. Y'all be safe. Peace.